In the previous video, we went over the system of sexual orientation that dominates in our society today. But remember, if sexual orientation were natural, these categories would be the same across all cultures and time periods, but they're not. If sexual desire, practices, and identities are defined by society, that means that they are also subject to change, because definitions change. So in that video, we also got a sense of how our conceptions of sexual orientation have changed over time as we moved from the Greek binary system to Kinsey's continuum to the contemporary multidimensional model of sexuality. But there are even more dramatic differences in sexuality when you compare different cultures. The Greek model, on which our understanding of sexuality is based, isn't the only way to construct sexuality. The ancient Romans, for example, had a very different understanding of sexuality, one that still exists today in large parts of the world. You even see elements of it within our own society, though it's less prominent than the Greek model, and most people aren't aware of its origins. Unlike the Greek view, which was based on attraction, the Romans were more concerned with the role one takes when having sex. In other words, the sex or gender of your partner was not as important as your behavior when engaging in sexual activity. What mattered was whether you took a dominant role or a submissive role, and whether that was consistent with your gender status and your social or class status compared to that of your sexual partner. Starting with domination, this is generally associated with those who take on the active role in a sexual relationship, what we might think of as the penetrator, or the person who, in today's language, is the top. Not surprisingly, for a patriarchal society, this role was also associated with masculinity. In other words, men were expected to take on the dominant role in order to demonstrate their masculinity. However, domination was also associated with having a higher status in society, which means that everyone with a higher status had a legitimate reason to take on a dominant role when interacting with those with a lower status, and that included sexual behavior. On the other hand, there's submission, which was associated with those who take on a more passive role in a sexual relationship. This is the person who is penetrated by the dominant partner, what we today call the bottom. Again, it comes as no surprise that in a patriarchal society, being submissive was a more feminine quality. However, submissiveness was also expected of all of those having a lower status in society when interacting with those with a higher status. Again, that included sexual behavior. Notice that this is yet another binary. It doesn't allow for anything in between, like, using our contemporary parlance, the category of versatile. We can't seem to get away from our dualistic thinking. Now, so far, this seems very straightforward and actually quite familiar because we too inhabit a patriarchal society. In a sexual pairing between a man and a woman, the man traditionally takes on the dominant role, and the woman takes on the passive role. However, keep in mind that this binary system was intimately tied not only to gender, but also to social status. This means that if you have another sexual pairing between a man and a woman, and they are both of equal class standing, but the woman is dominant while the man is passive, then both of them are being sexually deviant. However, if the man were from a lower class standing while the woman was from a higher class standing and she was dominant, that would not be sexually deviant because the difference in their social standing makes it acceptable, despite the fact that they are going against their gender role expectations. So, that is a male-female pairing. Let's change the combination. Within this system, it was perfectly okay for two men to have sex with one another so long as the man taking on the submissive role was from a lower social or class standing than the man taking on the dominant role. They are both conforming to the role expectations for those of their social status, even though it seems to contradict the gender role expectations for the submissive man. It wasn't deviant. But if these two men were from the same social status, then it would be considered deviant, but only for the submissive man. The dominant man wouldn't have to worry about his reputation because he was fulfilling both his gender and social status expectations. The submissive man in this pairing, however, would be violating both his gender and social status expectations, so he's the one who would be considered deviant, but only if they were caught. The same thing holds true for sex between women. It's okay so long as the submissive woman is from a lower social or class standing than the dominant woman. Again, this is because they are fulfilling their social status expectations. In our society, any same-sex pairing has traditionally been perceived as deviant, regardless of whether a person was conforming to the role expectations for domination and submission. But that's because we live in a society that was based on the Greek model of attraction and not the Roman model, which emphasizes the role one takes when engaging in sexual activity. Variations on this Roman model of sexuality still exist today and can be found in the Mediterranean region, the Middle East, and in Latin America. Generally speaking, a man who has sex with another man, for example, but who takes only the dominant role, is not being deviant because he's conforming to the normative expectations of his culture. As an example, I'm going to read from an article I found in Out magazine, which is a magazine aimed at queer people in the United States. The title of the article is Border Crossings, and it focuses on queer and trans experiences in Mexico. In the article, they say, for middle and upper class men, there are some 40 gay discos and bars in Mexico City. The working class scene is something else entirely. Around the corner from Mexico City's famed Garibaldi Plaza, where wailing mariachis lament everything from the economic crisis to love affairs gone bad, an unlikely combination of revelers gathers at the Catorce bar on Saturday nights. A few hundred enlisted military men mix with prostitutes, male, female, and trans, and a few dozen others out to dance, drink warm Tecate beer, watch soldiers have sex with dancing girls on stage, and find dates. While the scene looks ripe for a barroom brawl, generally the only violence is from military police busting cadets for being seen in disreputable establishments. Soldiers hooking up with male partners in scenes such as this one are popularly called mayates. They are generally married men who don't consider themselves gay. While the term is used descriptively in parts of southern Mexico, it's unfriendly to the point of being offensive everywhere else. There's a ton of bisexuality in Mexico, says El Talleres González de Alba, who published a book on the subject. It's a lot like the Mediterranean countries where men have bisexual relations, but not a bisexual identity. For women, it's fairly common as well. Nayeli Fuentes, who was Francisco Robles' running mate and lives with her partners Beatriz Pimentel in Mexico City, says, there are many married women who have female lovers. While the mayate is more of a macho tradition, bisexuality among women has been more free and expressive. González de Alba finds the U.S. obsession with defining sexuality, gay, straight, bi, to be tedious. The U.S. is a country of separations, he says. You guys professionalize everything, from football to surfboarding. All these categories surface, and pretty soon you can't just go to the beach and have fun. As you can see, the culture surrounding sexuality is clearly very different between Mexico and the United States, and that difference has its origins in the fact that they are based on opposing understandings of sexuality, one stemming from the Roman model and the other stemming from the Greek. Ironically, they have to resort to using the term bisexual in order to talk about it, which is an example of these two different models of sexuality bleeding into one another. This is actually a normal social process. As different cultures come into contact with one another, you start to see elements of each one bleed into the other. So you'll find elements of the Roman model within our society, and you will also see elements of the Greek model in other societies, such as in Mexico.